couple more folks coming in. All right, it's 12:03, so I think it's time to jump in. We'll allow folks to just filter in and listen along as they join. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's webinar. This is Solar 101 for Businesses, hosted by Community Climate Collaborative. I'm really excited for the panel we have today. I'll be introducing our three awesome speakers. My name is Coles Jennings. I'm the Director of Corporate Sustainability. I'll tell you a little bit more about my work as we go along. Just a little bit of housekeeping off the top. This meeting is being recorded for everyone's information. We'll be uploading the recording to our website for future learners. This is really important basic content for any business thinking about going solar. Really excited to provide this as a resource moving forward. As an attendee, you'll also receive an email with a recording and some key takeaways. This is part of our Summer Impact Maker series of events here at C3. That includes both some key webinars, including a companion webinar on residential solar coming up in a couple weeks, and we'll talk about that at the end, as well as some meetups in Charlottesville with C3 staff. Those are our summer meetups. We do them around town just to get climate-minded folks or climate-curious folks together in person to talk about climate and all things related. And then last housekeeping item for questions, please pop them in the chat at any time. If you're like me, it'll come and go or go as quickly as it comes. So feel free to just put it in when it occurs to you. We can take a beat between speakers to try to address any burning questions, and then we'll have some more open Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's get into our agenda. So you're going to hear a little bit from me at the top. I'm going to talk about C3, our work and our mission here in Charlottesville and also beyond, with some exciting growth plans in the future. Then we've got the real stars of the show, three great experts here for you today. First, we have Joe Moore with Tiger Solar. Joe, would you say hello? There's Joe.
Hello,
Joe.
happy to be here.
Thank you, Joe. Joe's gonna be talking with us just the basics of commercial solar, things to look out for in your building, what makes for a successful project. Then we have Ethan Dunstan, who's the Senior Vice President of Business Banking at UVA Community Credit Union. Say hello, Ethan.
Hello,
there.
Welcome.
Ethan's going to be talking to us about financing solar projects, which of course, for many businesses is a very key component of making it all work. And then lastly, we have a proud solar owner, Kevin Powers from Powers Farm Brewery in Midland, Virginia. Say hello, Kevin.
Hey, everybody.
Kevin is going to tell us just about his experience with solar and what it's like as a small business to go through the process and share some numbers with us, which as a former engineer, I really appreciate. So yeah, really excited about the content today. But before we start, shameless promo for C3. If you're not familiar with us, we are the Community Climate Collaborative. We are focused on climate action at the local level exclusively and entirely. We think this is a really important frontier. We are, very appreciative and celebratory of all the great accomplishments that have happened at state and federal levels. And now we see a real need to put these things into action at the community, and many climate solutions happen within communities and rely on community support. So our mission is to build coalitions across communities, households, businesses, neighborhoods, local government, nonprofits, bring them all together, unite them in prioritizing climate as an issue at the local level and making transformational change. Just a little bit of work to do there. We divide our work into 5 separate campaigns, each with its own purpose and kind of supporting that coalition building mission. We work with youth. We have a number of programs to, find and energize the youth voice, educate them and then turn them into ambassadors for the climate cause within their communities and among their peers. Our energy equity campaign looks at the issue of energy burden and high energy costs for low and middle income households, raising attention to that issue, which is unfortunately prevalent in some areas of many communities, and researching and implementing solutions to help relieve that issue for the households that need it most. Our Act Now campaign, our accessible clean transportation, researches and recommends policy initiatives and does community engagement around the transportation system to make sure that the transportation system is more effective, more widely used, safe, and importantly, clean, and not contributing as much to the climate problem and the air quality issues in our local community. My work is to work with businesses. I spearhead our efforts with businesses of all shapes and sizes. Our mission is to really empower them to lead by example, to take their own actions, and then feel empowered to bring others, their peers, their community stakeholders, their employees along with them as well, and really make a difference in this coalition. And then lastly, again, this is part of our Impact Maker series, supporting our Make Your Own Impact campaign. If you haven't seen our Make Your Own Impact guidebook, that's really like our starter kit. If you're just getting into climate, especially in your own daily life, you're wondering, what can we learn? What can we do? This is a great resource to start with. It's the foundation for a lot of our community engagement and household engagement. So really encourage everybody to find that document. And Terry, would you mind popping that in the chat, please? Thank you. In the chat. Okay. So moving on, my little spiel at the top. I think my purpose here is just to let everyone know the basics of solar. There's some real Captain Obvious stuff in here. Again, this is a 101 course, but I think it's important, even if you're familiar with solar, which most people are likely to some degree. I think it's really important to start with the basics to know what you're getting into, because solar is a long-term investment. It's like buying a car or buying a house in many respects. So it's important to know your motivations and align them with your mission as a business and your goals as a business. So basic truths about solar, right? Again, this is going to be a refresher for most people. It saves you money on your power bill. It costs money to install. It's equipment. It needs to be purchased. It needs to be installed by a qualified contractor. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions significantly because solar does not produce greenhouse gas emissions, and it replaces the power from our grid that's derived from fossil fuels. It's a long-lasting investment. Most solar systems are going to last 20 plus years. Most systems will pay for themselves over time with those savings. So it depends greatly, and we'll talk about some of those influential factors. Some systems may pay for themselves as quickly as 4 to 5 years. Some may be longer. Lastly, you can sell what's called the clean attributes or the green attributes of your solar power. This is in the form of something called solar renewable energy certificates, or SRECs. This is a really important nuance that I think often gets overlooked. There is a market for these. They can help supplement the cost of solar and provide more monthly income. However, you are selling your claim to that power. So it's really important to know why you want to do this. And there is no right answer, I'll say right off the bat, but it's important for each business or household to kind of go through this process. So first of all, what is your solar why? Are you doing it strictly as a business investment? Could be a great answer. Are you trying to hedge against rising energy costs? Here in Virginia, we saw rates from our providers jump 10 to 15% last year. Now, that's not typical, but it is something that is hard to plan for and is very much a risk in the future. Solar really helps prevent your exposure to that kind of increase. Is your goal primarily reducing your greenhouse gas emissions and your carbon footprint? Again, a great reason. What are your goals there? What are your reduction goals? How much do you want to offset? Do you want to show your customers and employees? Do you want solar to be visible? Do you want a dashboard if it's on the roof to show people the impact that you're making? Do you want to make your property more sellable, more marketable down the road? These are all great reasons. Usually there's more than one. I think going through this simple checklist is really helpful to help you sort of navigate some of these decisions that come up along the way. And we'll hear from our experts about what some of those decisions might be. Number two, make sure you have solar in the right context. On-site solar is a high impact climate solution. It's a top 10 climate solution per project drawdown. Again, it's long-term. As soon as you hit that payback, if it's in the first 5 years, it pays for itself thereafter, right? You're in the money thereafter. It can be cash positive. In most cases, it can be cash positive. And in some cases, it can offset all of your electric power if you're in a 2 or 3 story building. Perfectly achievable. One thing, or things on-site solar is not, it's not the only solution. It's not necessarily the cheapest solution, and it's not necessarily the quickest solution. And this is where I have to preach my gospel. If you have a thermostat, which is anybody that works in a workplace or owns a home or lives in a home, program your thermostat. It's the easiest thing you can do. It's the cheapest thing you can do. Even if you have to buy a new one, it'll pay for itself in 3 months' time. I promise you. The takeaway here is that solar is a big, very important piece of a larger puzzle to reduce your energy, to reduce your carbon footprint. Make a plan, stick with the plan. Absolutely, solar belongs as a very important piece of the plan. It may not necessarily be the first thing you do, and you may find that if you tackle some quick energy savings, energy efficiency efforts first, then you can really right-size your solar system and be set up for success in the long term. Lastly, solar is a business relationship. If you are a business owner, you're going to enter into business relationships purposefully and carefully. You should do the same with a solar purchase. You will own the system for a long period of time. They are low maintenance, but they do require check-ins from time to time. You'll develop a relationship with the installer. The installer is likely to become your operations and maintenance provider for that system. So just do your homework, right? Make sure the installers you're talking to, they have experience. Always get multiple quotes and be very upfront with the installers that that's what you're doing. Always ask for customer referrals. If you're not getting them, that should be a red flag. And feel free to ask someone neutral to review your proposals. Ask your friendly local climate consultant, ask a solar consultant, ask another business owner that's gone through the solar process to take a look and just, spend 10 minutes going over the key inputs. Know those key inputs. So we don't have time to get into some of these details today, but I wanted to arm folks with sort of the key buzzwords to be thinking about and researching if you're going solar. What do you currently pay for energy costs? What are your rates? What does your proposal say the system costs? How does that compare to averages? What is your system putting out in terms of energy per panel, essentially? What are the rebates and credits available, and are they being fully taken advantage of by your solar installer? And then most importantly, especially if you're financing, what's your monthly payment going to be, and how does that compare to your energy savings? And is that going to be cash positive? A very important consideration for a lot of businesses. Just make sure you're checking for unreasonable assumptions. One thing in particular is those energy rate increases. Make sure whatever is shown in your proposal lines up with reality, and the installer should be able to walk you through that. Whatever they're assuming energy rates will increase should be realistic. All right. Okay, Sarah, great question. Good place for us to look for recommendations, vendors to consider for these projects in our area, a BBB of sorts for solar companies. Joe, do you have any input there?
Well, you call Tiger Solar. I guess probably, I know LEAP has had lists like that in the past, certainly for residential installers, so they could be a good resource. Another one would be, it's an acronym, it's SEIA, the Solar Energy Industry Association. That'll give you a list of who is active in their group. So those are two good places to start, I'd say.
Yeah, and another place I'll chime in is there are in some locations chapters of Renewable Energy Alliance. In Seville, there's a Seville REA, but there are other chapters around the state. So it sort of depends on how active solar companies are in your particular area. I would say we're not to the point of having as robust a resource as, say, a Better Business Bureau, but certainly, Sarah, call me and we can talk as well. Okay, great. Well, I am gonna be quiet now, and I'm gonna get to our experts. So I'm gonna kick it to you, Joe. Joe is, sorry, should have had your bio queued up. Joe is the Director of Commercial Solar at Tiger Solar. Joe joined the Tiger Solar team in 2013. He's seen all sides of solar, from spending time as an installer, as a designer, and running crews and managing a regional branch of residential and commercial installers. Joe has participated in or overseen over 5 megawatts and over 200 projects of ground-mounted and rooftop-mounted solar PV solar throughout Virginia. Take it away, Joe.
All right, thanks a lot for having me. Really appreciate you putting this on and inviting me to join. One thing I've definitely learned over my 10-year career, there's a lot of education that goes on with solar. It's kind of a newfangled thing for a lot of folks. So it helps having an independent third party like C3 here to vouch for it rather than the person that's asking you to sign a check. So thank you for putting this on. We can go, this is just a quick overview of the things we're going to cover today. I could go on and on about all of this. Don't be shy to hit me with questions that I can and follow up on at the end of this portion. But I will try not to go into too much detail because we could be here all day. So go ahead. This is just two power bills. These are, if I'm sure a lot of you have seen these, different whatever your utility is, it's going to look pretty similar. The main takeaway I want to hammer home here is the most foundational piece of how solar works is all we're trying to do is eliminate that power bill. A lot of people ask us, well, is it going to be big enough to run this machine? That's not the right way to think about it. I like to use a water analogy of the solar power making electricity that flows into your building. You can use that electricity, but if you're not using it, it'll actually spin the meter backwards by flowing back to the grid. And that's what we refer to as net metering. So your meter goes backwards during the day, and then at night when you need power, it goes forward again. So the main thing here I just wanted to highlight is we're going from a power bill of $220 a month in this case down to $10 a month. There can be a lot of you on the business side are going to know that you have demand charges also associated with your power bill. This is a GS1 rate schedule. Again, I won't go into all the details of the different rate schedules, but just know we don't always project solar will definitely affect your demand charges, but in a lot of cases they can. So that's something we need to do a pretty thorough analysis to help understand how the solar is going to affect demand charge. But it is possible. And when you get into GS2, sometimes there could be some really good situations where the solar can eliminate most or all of demand charges, but we don't like to guarantee that from the onset. But just know that's worth an in-depth analysis. Good question to ask your solar provider who's giving you quotes, to make sure that they're doing all that properly, because it is pretty complicated math. But we do it day in and day out and are happy to walk you through that process. Go to the next one. Go to the next slide, please. Can you hear me okay? Hello? I can see everybody moving. I'm not sure if you can.
We can hear you, Joe. I mean, the presentation maybe is having trouble.
Okay, thanks for telling me. I'll go ahead if you can hear me. And Coles, if you want to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down on this, I'll go ahead and move to the next slide just to keep things flowing. It's basically just going to talk about roof types. So the three main types of roofs we see would be like a flat roof in a typical industrial setting where you have a flat roof with either a TPO or an EPDM membrane. And the key thing I want to let people know about is that's great. That's something that we can do, that we do all the time. And in a lot of ways, we like it because we do not have to penetrate the roof in any way, shape, or form. That usually is important to our customers, especially with newer guidelines on air quality and things like that. So,
sorry, Joe, I'm back on now.
No worries. You can see in the upper right there, that's an example, the little kind of basket that holds on to ballast blocks. The weight of the system keeps it from flying off the roof, and there's a lot of engineering that goes into that, obviously. But the key takeaway is, if it's a flat roof, it's great. As you can see, we pitched the panels up a little bit so they can collect more sunlight. and that actually increases their health because there's airflow around them. So flat roofs are very good, very workable. And then more standard, roofs that we see on homes and certainly plenty of buildings would have a shingle roof. We do have to penetrate that, but we do it all the time. There's a multi-layered flashing system that keeps any leaks from happening. And you can rest assured that as long as your installer knows what they're doing, a shingle roof is a full go for solar. And standing seam, it's the other picture shown, the barn. In that instance, we attach right to the seam of the roof. Again, no penetrations there. We're just biting onto the seam. So long and the short of it is pretty much any roof type is applicable for solar. The other things to really keep in mind are, of course, the age of the roof. You don't want to have to replace your roof in the next 10 years. We would advise that you get that done before installing the solar system. And then the other variable that we will look at is, but I don't want people to think that their roof is not worth an investigation, is the pitch or the orientation. So that refers to how steep is the roof and what direction is it facing. We don't want to be facing north, but even if it's faced north and it's not very steep incline, it still might work out to be a good site for solar, and that would be included in the analysis of not only your production, but the cost of the system. And I'm just going to keep rolling unless you tell me otherwise, Coles. Okay.
Keep going, Joe. I'm sorry. Terry's going to try to get slides. It's crashing my computer for some reason.
No, I've got it up so I can see them, just nobody else.
Great. I know. Yeah, we're working on it. Okay, here we go.
So going back one to carports and ground mounts. There you go. These are becoming more and more popular. Obviously, if you don't have a good roof, either because you have shade or just not a lot of space on your roof, you have a multi-story building with not a lot of roof space per square foot. Ground mounted systems are something that we've done a lot of in our past, but what's becoming more and more common are carports. The obvious benefit there is one, good visibility to your customers if that's important, but it also does provide some protection for vehicles, whether it's employee vehicles or your customers. Very specifically, I've read articles about, like, in California, car dealerships will really value putting solar over their inventory cars because it's cheaper to replace the solar panels than it is to replace their cars. Not necessarily cheaper, but it doesn't affect their cash flow and their ability to do business in the same way if they had a hailstorm or something like that. So we're seeing more and more of these. It's it's an industry that's been around for quite a while. I mean, we did one as long as 12 years ago, but it's come a long way. There's more players, so the costs have come down. And the big driver that we'll get to in a moment, but it's going to apply to both ground mounted systems and carported systems, is we believe that the IRA is going to open up a US made 10% tax credit for the steel that goes into the carports and ground mount. So that'll be a big deal, because currently that's kind of the difference between roof mounted solar and ground mounted solar, is that you're paying extra for extra physical infrastructure to hold the panels up. So if we can bring those costs down, that's going to be a big win for this part of the market. Go on to the next one. There's obviously a lot more that we could go into here. This is certainly potential for rabbit holes, but the main things I wanted people to walk away with is, if you have a whole lot of electrical meters, that's going to add significant costs, because we're effectively going to have to electrically tie into each meter in order to offset that. In some cases, you can work that out with the utility company and circumvent that, but it's kind of rare. So if you're planning a new building, or if you're just analyzing which properties are best for solar, you will want to target a meter that has a high usage and therefore can have one system that interconnects to it and offsets all of that power for that meter. It doesn't mean if you had 2 or 3, that's not a problem, but the more complex it gets, obviously, the more costs you add. And then transformers. That's one of the first things one of our salespeople will look at when they arrive on site. We cannot backfeed any more solar than the transformer can handle. Oftentimes that works out where the transformers were sized similarly to what the building needs and therefore what the solar is going to produce. Sometimes that all works out. Usually it does. But there are instances, particularly with older transformers that are maybe like really maxed out. You know, your business started 20 years ago and you've added all kinds of electrical infrastructure, which of course increases your electric bill, but they didn't go out and upgrade the transformers. That's where we might run into that. The other thing to keep in mind here is if you ever see 2 cans instead of 3, this is a 3-phase system shown here, which a lot of commercial businesses are going to have. But sometimes there's only 2 cans, and we call that a delta high leg transformer setup. And until a couple of years ago, we could work around that. But recently, at least in Dominion territory, they've said you essentially cannot attach solar to a delta high leg setup. So that's one thing if you're kind of analyzing your own site. And of course, we're happy to do that for you, or any competent solar installer can. But if you have 2 transformers instead of 3, or you know that you have a delta high leg, that is something that'll have to be amended before you can install solar. And secret side note, I would talk to the power company about that without mentioning solar, because if you mention solar, it's on you to fix it. If you say, I just want 3-phase power because I want to use more power, then they're more likely to work with you on the costs. You can move on to the next one, please. I won't spend too much time here because I think we'll address these later, but this is just a quick rundown of the incentives as they stand now. The ITC is something that's been around for a long time, but it's sort of changed over the years. If you've heard sort of different numbers thrown out about how much it is, it was 30% going back 10 years, and then in 2016, it got extended, and then it went down to 26 and 22%. We're back thanks to the IRA. It is back to 30% for the next 10 years. So that's great. We've got some consistency and the ability to plan ahead. So that is a tax credit. So you need taxable income to take advantage of that, but that's something that we'll work with you to analyze. And then in addition, note the asterisks, but we believe there was guidance that came out in the IRA essentially establishing a 10% additional tax credit for American-made panels and materials. That is still being ironed out on exactly how does one, prove that it's American-made and what percentage of the project materials are required for that. But we're hoping to have that sorted out by year's end. And also what is more certain is the 10 to 20% for low income. And I was quite surprised on how many areas do qualify as low income. So that's just something you can look at with government maps. I'm forgetting the exact right one to reference, but you can look that up to find out if you're in a low income area. And then the USDA REAP grants, also, you might be surprised to learn that the entire city of Charlottesville qualifies as a rural area, and therefore any small business is eligible to apply for REAP grants. So you do have to be a small business by SBA.gov standards. But if that's the case and you're in a rural area, then you can apply for a REAP grant. If you're actually an agricultural business, you don't have to be small, you can be any size to apply. Cole's already touched on SREX, so I won't go over that again, but just know that that is a changing market. We try to be conservative when we project the value of SREX, but it's a really beneficial financial driver to have as a part of your ROI on solar. And since that came about in the last 2 years, we've seen the simple return on systems drop by a full year or two, thanks to the SRECs. And then, of course, you can depreciate the cost of the system, just like anybody else. Or just like any other purchase for your business. Sorry, I got distracted by that question. I'll go ahead and answer it. An SREC stands for Solar Renewable Energy Certificate. And Coles, do you want me to dive deeper into that, or is that going to be addressed later?
No, now's a good time, and I'm happy to chime in as well. But you go ahead first, Joe.
Okay, yeah, essentially, what it equals, the certificate equals 1 megawatt hour of power. So if you say you have like a 50 kW solar array, it's typically going to produce, like, we'll call it 60 megawatt hours of power throughout the year. That is, so you have 60 SRECs, and to use rough math, you can sell them for approximately $50. So that system's going to get you $3,000 in your pocket, taxable income, but in your pocket. And the end game of SRECs gets a lot more complicated, but the short, quick version is that they're sold. You'll sell them to a broker, and the broker will sell them then to someone like Dominion, who is required to hit certain standards for renewable energy generation. And they can do that either by making the power themselves or by buying these SRECs, and they're actually required to do it with the SRECs for certain percentages. So I'll let you add on if there's anything.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add on is there is a trade-off in that the claims that you will make, say you're a business and you want to promote that you have solar power, by selling SRECs, those claims get a little more complicated because technically you're selling the claim to the green power to a utility or to a third party. So there's ways to, massage that and have a consistent message. It can be very helpful supplemental income for, if the solar system performance is kind of marginal, but it's just something to be, I like for people to be very eyes wide open about the claims that you're making if you are selling your SRECs. So just an important piece there.
Great point. All the more reason to put the panels on a carport in the front of your building, because your customers will still be able to see the panels without making any claims about them.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much, Joe.
My pleasure.
All right, Terry, next slide, please. All right. Next up, we have Ethan Dunstan. Ethan is the Senior Vice President of Business Banking of the UVA Community Credit Union. Ethan has the good fortune to lead UVA Community Credit Union's commercial lending team. In a career spanning several decades, he has specialized in developing long-term relationships with small and mid-sized businesses with the ultimate goal of providing clients and prospects commercial lending products, as well as deposit services and cash management solutions. Take it away, Ethan.
Hey, thank you, Coles. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I will say I take the expert title with a grain of salt for some of the topics I'll be covering. I will be sure to give full disclaimer and disclosures. I have had a more decades long career in commercial banking than probably I'd like to admit. As well, solar and clean energy is kind of a personal hotspot for me. Have a lot of interest in trying to lower carbon footprint, and I've had the good fortune to be able to work on several solar projects with folks here in Virginia, here in Charlottesville, since I've been in the credit union, several not-for-profits as well, which has been great. So without further ado, we'll jump right in if you want to go to the next slide. So I called this one Financing 101. This is really not related to the topic of the day per se. I mean, it is, but this is actually anytime you're coming to a financial institution and you're looking for a loan, typically they'll be looking for these three things. We want primary source of repayment. How are you going to pay the loan back? Typically, that is cash flow, i.e. you have enough positive revenue generation that you can take on the additional debt out of your net operating income. A secondary source of repayment, typically that's the collateral itself. maybe it's a building, maybe it's a piece of equipment. It's something that we're financing that if for some reason the loan is not paid back, the financial institution can take that collateral back, sell it, and try to recover the loan. And then tertiary is finally, typically when you're dealing with businesses, that is a personal guarantee. Most financial institutions will require a personal guarantee from the owner of the business. Obviously, that might be a little different when you're dealing with a not-for-profit, but traditional, conventionally owned businesses, we are looking for that personal guarantee. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So solar itself is actually considered an equipment loan. If real estate can be involved, it actually can be a much simpler. I call this the easy button. You can get more straightforward and perhaps better terms, but real estate doesn't necessarily have to be involved. Loan term typically matches the useful life of the equipment. Most financial institutions for solar panels are using 20 years. I think Joe might tell you that it should be more like 25, but we've sort of standardized on 20 years. In today's climate with the interest rate environment we're in, I don't know of anybody who's offering a fixed rate for longer than 5 years. And so typically what you're seeing is you're going to get a fixed rate for that first 5 years of the term, and then you're going to have adjustments to that rate every 5. Quite frankly, that's probably good news for folks today, because it means you have a chance to get a lower rate. We're a pretty high interest rate environment. I don't expect that to last forever. And so as rates come down, typically your rate might automatically reset at a lower rate. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but talking about debt service coverage, basically debt service is that monthly payment that you need to make on that new loan you're getting. Again, this applies to if it's a solar loan or if it's a loan, any other type of loan. And we want to see that you have 1.25 times coverage at a minimum, and that would include all of your business debt, just not the new loan. So what do I mean by that? What we want to see is that you have $1.25 of net operating income for every dollar of business debt that you have. Again, from a loan to value perspective, if we're relying potentially on that collateral as a source of repayment, typically we're not going to lend 100% of the value of the collateral. Typically, we're going to be somewhere in that 70 to 75% range, because we know that if we're having to actually sell the collateral to repay the loan, it's probably a distressed situation, and it's probably not going to be a situation where we're going to have full value related to that. Any questions or comments so far? Okay, hearing none, go ahead and go to the next slide. I would say, this is opinion on my part. Obviously, Coles and Joe may have their own opinion, but I would say, at least in my career, this is one of the most affordable times to install solar. There are a lot of credits out there. There are tax credits. There are things you can do with depreciation. In addition to the overall project costs in general coming down, I think it really is kind of an amazing climate rather, to be looking at solar. Just kind of quickly looking through some of the tax benefits, and this is one of my disclosure areas. I am not a CPA. I am not a tax preparer. So these are things that you should absolutely discuss with your tax preparer. But there are a lot of good credit is available out there now. Joe mentioned the ITC or investment tax credit. This is a tax credit that can be up to 30% of the cost of installing the project. So For example, if you have a $100,000 project cost, you can get a $30,000 tax credit to help offset that cost. The solar production tax credit, this is actually something relatively new for solar. I believe it was part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it actually allows for a tax credit related to production, kilowatt hour production. And what it basically states is that for the first 10 years after installation, you can get a tax credit of 2.75 cents per kilowatt hour based on production as opposed to the installation cost. That tax credit typically works best for large solar installations that are in very sunny areas. So they're going to be producing a lot of kilowatt hours, but those are, two different ones that you can kind of compare and contrast. Moving over to my CPA friends in the accounting side of the house, there are different ways to depreciate. Typically, when you're doing your taxes, the IRS says you have to depreciate an asset over the useful life of that asset. And so if you're looking to depreciate a solar panel, which has a 25, or a solar system, which has a 25-year useful life, you typically would have to depreciate that over the entire 25 years. There are some special programs. The first is called, you'll hear it referred to as MACRAs, or the modified accounting. I forget exactly the definition, but it's the modified accelerated cost recovery system. It's right there on the slide. That allows you to depreciate over 5 years instead of 25. So you can have much more depreciation cost offsetting your net operating income up front. There's also some bonus depreciation available. Folks will often refer to this as Section 179. And that depreciation actually lets you claim the entire cost of the system in the first year after installation. So it really is a great way to take a look at some of these tax credits. Sorry, I've got a message popping up on my screen. It's a great way to save some money on installation of these systems. And then the last one is the property tax exemption credit. And these are credits that are available. It is a state requirement that the system be producing less than 25 kilowatt hours. And then so you need to check to see if that system would be available for that credit. Next slide. So this is just an example of the two different depreciation, the tax credits that you can use, and showing the depreciation examples as well. I neglected when I sent this to Cole. As you can see, I grabbed it from the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. I highly recommend their website. They have a lot of great information out there. I neglected to include that they tried to keep the math simple here. So this would be for $1 million project cost installation. So that's where you can see you've got the 300,000 for the ITC. You can also see the numbers for the PTC and how that might look. Again, this is not something that I'm prepared today or really at any point to go through all the ins and outs with you on. I'm not a tax preparer, but it sort of gives you a starting point to see how what it might look like. And I definitely encourage all of you to take a look at this with your tax preparer. I did want to make one other comment on the ITC, which I think was new in the Inflation Reduction Act legislation. We're going to talk about some programs that are available for not-for-profits who, of course, don't have typically a tax burden, and therefore offsetting that tax burden is not something that's particularly helpful to them. There actually are some caveats in the new legislation that actually allow you to recover a credit from the federal government, regardless of whether you have a tax burden or not. So keep that in mind. Next slide. Go ahead, Coles.
Ethan, just let's, I want to make sure Kevin has at least 10 minutes. So if we can just zip through these, and
Yep,
I might
absolutely.
circle back to a couple of highlights. Thank you.
Happy to do it. So I just wanted to throw this up here very quickly. Again, for our not-for-profit friends in the past, there has been, not much incentive for them to offset tax liability because they often don't have any tax liability. So there are groups that have set up. Typically, there are folks who have a large tax liability, but also are interested in climate initiatives. Think Amazon, think Apple, think other big companies like this, and they actually will be involved in helping you finance a solar project, understanding that you're going to give them 100% of those tax credits to offset their tax liability. So that's something our not-for-profit friends can take a look at. I don't really need to say a whole lot more about that since we're running out of time, but there's a lot of information that's available if you're interested. Go ahead, Coles.
Nope, you're good.
And then last, really, and Coles probably can talk about this as well, or if not better than I can, but there is a CPACE program. It's called Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. PACE is a program that's come to Virginia a few years back. Albemarle County, I think, just signed up for it earlier this year. I think it was January of this year. And what it lets you do is actually sort of add the cost of the financing of the project to your tax assessment. And so we all get a tax bill every year from Albemarle County that says this is what we owe for property tax. This actually allows you to carry a loan to the county. With that, you can finance 100% of the project, which, as I mentioned, is typically different from a financial institution. They're looking only to do 70 or 75. They often have long-term payback periods up to 30 years. And I think probably one of the best parts of this program is it actually can transfer, the loan can transfer with the property. Typically, if you're borrowing from a financial institution, when the property sells, that loan, as well as any mortgage you have, gets paid off. So something to keep in mind.
All right, thank you so much, Ethan. Yeah, CPACE is something I'm personally very excited about, and you can see the growth on this chart. It started as a figment of an idea a little over 10 years ago. And in states that have done it well and for a number of years, it has just absolutely exploded, which I think is a testament to how effective it is for some of these long-term energy projects that otherwise kind of compete with, traditional capital. So it's exciting times. We're just getting started in Virginia. So really excited to see where things go. I put in the chat, if you're not in the Charlottesville area, I know we have some non-Seville folks here. 2 things to ask, and again, call or email me. Check and see if your local government has authorized CPACE. Again, Albemarle County recently has. We're hoping Charlottesville does. Fewer localities throughout the state, unless you're in Northern Virginia. And then ask if your property has or your locality has a solar property tax exemption. So those are 2 local issues that can be really influential in the success of a solar project. So I would be remiss not to highlight those since we're all about local climate. Terry, could you advance, please?
Can I make one last very quick comment, Coles?
Absolutely.
If you are looking to borrow from a financial institution and you have a commercial mortgage on a property you own through that financial institution, they absolutely should be the first place you should look to if you're looking for traditional conventional financing. It's going to be easier for them because they probably already have a deed of trust on your property. So I definitely would start there. With, obviously love to talk to you at the credit union, but if you're banking with somebody else, that really should be your first stop as far as traditional financing goes.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you, Ethan. All right, just a quick housekeeping note. We had some technical issues that delayed us a bit. So I want to make sure our last presenter, Kevin, gets at least 10 minutes. That means we'll probably run slightly over. Of course, if you have other obligations, please feel free to hop off. You'll be able to catch up on the recording at the very end. So without further ado, I'll introduce Kevin Powers. Kevin, along with his wife, Melody, owns and operates Powers Farm and Brewery, which has been providing organically grown fruits and vegetables through their CSA program since 2012 and brewing beer on their small 5-barrel system featuring products grown on their farm since 2017. Take it away, Kevin.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. Excited to share, what we've liked about this program, and I can be pretty efficient here too. So yeah, let me, if we could go to the next slide, I'll dive right in. Just some very quick context about who we are. So my wife and I grow fruits and vegetables on 2.5 acres in Fauquier County. We're just south of Warrenton, Virginia. We have kind of two things going. Half of the growth is going into the beer, half of it's for the vegetables. Get to the next slide, please. And, we do it all pretty small scale. We are not a huge business. We're not a necessarily well-capitalized business. We do a lot of stuff by hand. We brew on a very small system, one of the smallest in the States. Excuse me. Go to the next slide. The solar panels. So we have this is our brewery building and storage. We have kind of a split setup. So half of our solar is on the roof, half of it is standalone out in the field. Here's kind of a picture of the roof. People rarely see this, by the way, interestingly enough, from a marketing perspective. Go to the next slide, please. And here's the ground mount. I think one thing I did want to mention, I think if you have a roof that needs replaced immediately, then that's something to consider. But I would say concerns, I feel like I've heard a lot of kind of secondhand concerns about it damages the roof or it's tough to repair. In my experience, we did have to shift our panels on the roof once. That was not, Joe maybe and his team will disagree, but it really wasn't that challenging. I really would have preferred to have them all roof mounted, to be frank with you, if we had the roof space. It's a little bit of prep work, but other than that, I was pretty happy with it. A little bit of extra prep. So the ground mount's a lot of maintenance. I've got to mow, I've got to weed whack. We don't spray herbicides on our farm, so that's the challenge for us. But go to the next slide, please. And yeah, to Joe's point, anything we can do to keep the soil in agricultural use rather than energy production is better. We already have the roof, so let's use it, certainly. That's a good point. So our system, quickly, the details, 22.4 kilowatt system. That's the DC. Of course, you lose some when you convert to usable AC. I did have that slide in there. I would have preferred the rooftop. We use Virtue Solar, which I think is local. There's a lot of great solar companies. They're one of them. Net metering, we've discussed. It does need to be a dedicated meter. I think the other thing here is we can't become a generator with net metering. So if we overproduce, we've never done that, but it's my understanding that overproduction would simply get kind of recaptured by the power company. Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, please. This is quickly out of the proposal that Virtue had sent me, and the only reason I mentioned it or wanted to include it, we do overproduce in the summer and underproduce in the winter. So we typically do have we'll build up a credit in the summer. We use a lot of energy and HVAC and that type of thing. So we still are using a lot of cooling energy, but this is kind of the cadence of how the net metering has worked for us. If you want to go to the next slide, please. And then, I'm really glad Coles mentioned, programming your thermostat. Brewing for us, we're really we're a brewery. There are a lot of breweries in the state. Brewing is a very energy intensive business. It's also, we do as much as we can to grow everything that we can here. I would love to, in that, we source our grain from Virginia farmers, from a Charlottesville malt house. So for us, using the energy that we can produce on our own roof is just part of trying to source as effectively as we can. We have a lot of refrigeration. Go to the next slide, please. we do a lot of small scale stuff. Those are temperature jacketed fermenters on the right, and we've kind of swapped out as much as we can. I like this slide. We're milling grain here. In the top left, we have these electric heaters that we've used during COVID when we expanded outdoor seating. We used to have those propane ones with the torches, and we swapped all of those out. So, I think I also want to mention that when we got a quote for our system and when we were able to build it, you do really want to, if you're at your business now, think about things that aren't using electric power and potentially think about investing and converting them over, because that existing usage before your solar install is an important ceiling for you. At least it was for us, and maybe there's other programs, but for us, it really is a function of, get everything electrified as opposed to, propane or whatever else you're using. If you want to go to the next slide for me. Yeah, so I would do that first. Very quick 2-second aside here is we're talking about solar installs, but I also wouldn't sleep on really small scale DC solar projects. This one on the left is a solar panel that runs our automated chicken system. The item on the right is actually a still that we do direct current electrical distilling of a waste product that turns into ethanol that we use in some of our small engine equipment. Go to the next slide, please. I would just think through that if you're interested in solar. And then to my point earlier, I think, we have propane fired kettles. I would have loved to have thought about a creative way to electrify more stuff before we switched over to solar. That just can be really helpful. So yeah, if you want to go to the next slide. Real quick, just real world, what happened with the money. This was in 2019. You all are probably business owners and know that what you paid in 2019 for anything is not terribly relevant now. But we spent $58,000. That was kind of the ticket price. We did receive a REAP grant for 14. At the time, the solar credit had phased out, but what we received was before the phase out, and I think pretty parallel with the existing credits that were renewed. So, about half of the ticket price was paid for with grants. The other half we got a loan for. I would have loved to have gotten a 20-year loan at the interest rates that we had then, but we ended up getting a 7-year loan. The way that we thought about it, the way I thought about it, not wanting to carry as much debt, is I really just tried to get our monthly payment roughly equal to our average electrical bill. And for us, that was a 7-year loan. So it made the cash flow of this for our business very easy. It was, instead of the money going to Dominion, it went to our local bank. And more or less, that's how it's worked out. And, that's actually used to be a CPA in a prior life, but I also like to think of these things in much simpler terms. And that was a really simple way for us to think about it. If you want to go to the next slide, please. We've talked a lot about net metering. I won't re-talk about it. And then quickly on zoning, Fauquier County, I actually did pay property taxes on our system the first year. They went back in and excluded them on a local level, and then we've mentioned the state law. So I think that's an important consideration. We're under the 25 kilowatts, so that's fine. And then another quick thing that I get asked about, probably the number one question I get asked about on site, is whether we have batteries. And for me, I didn't want the batteries. I don't really, it's probably a separate webinar, but one thing from a business perspective is I can't really beat $12 a month in a hookup fee to finance our batteries. And yeah, it would be nice to have them when the power goes out, but there's other solutions to that. So, and the batteries are probably not the most efficient one. We do not have batteries, and I don't really have plans to use them. I think the net metering setup is a really advantageous setup for business owners like us. Yeah, one other quick thing, we have a second building that I made the decision to get a separate meter to it, and the Dominion can connect those meters for a fee, which the fee was a little higher than I would have liked. So that is a consideration, especially if you're expanding and you're thinking about adding meters versus going through your existing one. On a smaller scale like ours, that was a little bit of a mistake on my part. So SRECs, real quick, we do use them. They do help. This is a screenshot of what we were offered. I think the future of these has to do with the demand and whether Dominion is investing in their own infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. That's above my pay grade, but they have been a very effective. We signed a 3-year deal where it's kind of a set it and forget it. We get paid, and Berger has to deal with the market, and that's worked for us. So if you want to get to the next slide, please. And then to Cole's point that I'm really glad he mentioned is we have this generator now, and that's wonderful, but we also have 18 different compressors, cooling things and pumps and all kinds of stuff. And you really, really, really need to pay attention to your usage. It's not like you get solar and you have unlimited free energy forever. There's leakage in our systems, and if we're not paying attention to that leakage, then we're really wasting our money on a solar project, to be totally frank with you. So I found there's a ton of energy monitors. There's one called Sense, SENSE. Very, very easy to install, is able to identify individual units. And so for me, it's really important to be making sure that the panels are working, which is a dashboard on the right that we have, and that I'm not having my well pump running all the time because I have a small leak in a toilet or something like that. So I would go ahead and do this now. You don't need solar to be energy efficient. But I also wouldn't invest in solar if we weren't really paying attention to usage. Otherwise, you're just going to start getting bills, and you're going to be paying the bank and the power company because you're overusing. So I would just wanted to underline that. That's been helpful for us. If you want to go to the next slide. Just a quick shot of the solar panels not working. This didn't happen this past year, but it did the year before. They have generally been very effective, and so, I don't have anything really bad to say or any big missteps that we took. Really, really helpful system, been good for us in our business. And I'm thankful to have it, thankful for this webinar to have happened to share that with you all.
Kevin, thank you so much. Really appreciate your perspective, and we're on the same sheet of music in terms of energy efficiency and energy monitoring. Such an important kind of basic due diligence that I think sometimes gets overlooked because people get excited about solar and sort of skip the basics. So we had one question I just want to get to. I know we're slightly past time, so very quickly, green banks. There is a lot of federal funding coming in most cases through the states, some directly to set up green banks. These are typically like large institutions that will gather private capital as a means of investing in energy and climate projects. The reason they are needed is a lot of times those projects take longer to reap return on investment. So sometimes they struggle to get attention from private investors. So this is a way to attract that investment and set up energy specific financing. So it will be similar to CPACE as I understand it. There's a number of different mechanisms, including revolving loan funds, et cetera, et cetera. Main thing to know is hopefully in the next couple of years, we have a green bank in Virginia that will be, set up to fund energy and climate projects specifically. So with that, I really appreciate everyone's time. Again, I learned a lot today. This is part of, as I said at the top, our Impact Maker series. Please check us out. We've got another residential solar webinar. Tell your friends, and I will follow up with all the information, including slides and recording, and this will all be going on our website. So sorry for going a few extra minutes. Thank you for staying with us and really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Coles.
Take care, y'all.